Hear ye, it be Pugs, here with a new review. Well, clearly, based on my intro and my visuals, I'm covering a very thematic episode today, Dunces and Dragons. And just like the beginning of the season, this video is going to be a collab with Spongyreviews, just making it clear that I'm open to collabs. This video structure will be just like what we did for Fear of a Krabby Patty. After this intro is done, Spongyreviews will do their review of this episode, and then I'll do mine. And as you can see, we both have quite a bit to say about this episode. So for everyone who's watching today, I seriously appreciate y'all's attention and dedication, honestly. And I guess that transitions nicely to my regular segment here, saying thank you to everyone watching today. Even though it's quite long, I think this is going to be a pretty fun review. One thing I like about these collabs is that I think me and my collaborator have very different reviewing styles, which will be especially apparent in this video, I think. So even when we have similar opinions, we're still going about things very differently. It's just neat to me. Alright, I think that's enough preamble for today. Let's just get right into it and let me give the floor to Spongyreviews.
It's nice to be back on your channel, Pugs. Anyways, as you see on my screen, it's how my ranking works since I didn't mention it on the last time I collaborated with you. Anyways, as you can also see, this episode is special since I modified my profile picture for this episode specifically. Anyways, thou Satharith is going to watch thou fellow reviewer watcheth me review thou episode. Anyways, I will stop with the medieval accent, but honestly, this is my third favorite episode of the entire show. I cannot really explain why, but it's just something about the vibes about this episode that makes me like it so much. But anyway, let me get to the actual review. Anyway, I'm going to be talking quite a bit about the title card in this part of the review since there's just something about it that I love. And that's something you're going to hear quite a lot in this review. There's something that I love about this episode. So like I was saying, I think I know why I like this title card so much. It's got to be the background. As you can see, I am using the background of the title card. I mean, it's just the background for the dungeon. And I've got to say, it's neat to see something of the episode in the title card. Another thing that I really like about this part of the title card, it's got to be the music. They use Dunces and Dragons quite a bit in this episode. And I'm not kidding when I say that's the actual name of the OST of the title card they actually use in the episode. But anyway, let's move on to the actual episode. The episode starts off with them going to the actual carnival, and I'm actually glad that the fair is pretty quick in this, because I'm glad that most of the jokes aren't ha 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 look, it's trying to be medieval, but it's failing because it's new. And the people working there are breaking the character, and it smells bad, and SpongeBob and Patrick are oblivious, and the "and it smells bad" thing I mentioned is luckily a one-line gag, which there are many in this episode. And after they get in, there is a joke that I'm not going to mention what it's referencing, but I gotta say it's the best time the show has done this. I also quite like the line "someday but not today." It's pretty funny. Also, I like how SpongeBob and Patrick aren't as annoying as in other Season 4 episodes. Cough cough the thing and Good Neighbors cough cough. Anyways, I like Patrick's giant mutton. I want one of those. Also, we then get the jousting. Also, I like the misunderstanding SpongeBob and Patrick have, thinking they are watching it up close. Then I like how after SpongeBob asks Patrick if he knows how to ride a seahorse, I also think that the old grandma yelling "take his head off" is funny. Then after SpongeBob and Patrick get sent flying outside of the Renaissance Fair, they get sent to old medieval times. And now you may be asking, how did they get there? Well, I have a theory. So you know how in comic books a super fast hero goes flying around the world so fast they go back in time, right? I have a theory that SpongeBob and Patrick were so fast that they got sent back to medieval times. But anyway, then we get to my favorite part of the episode, the medieval part, like the real medieval part. I also like how SpongeBob is oblivious at the start of the medieval part. If you didn't notice the part where SpongeBob says, "I get your point," if you don't know, that's a callback from Frankendoodle where SpongeBob says, "You've made your point." Now that's some dedication from the writers right there. Then they get sent to the dungeon. Also, the guard for the dungeon has a British accent. I'm not going to question that. Then we get introduced to Squidly, who is the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Squidward, and then he curses Squidward, meaning that's why he can never play the clarinet. Then SpongeBob makes an impression of Squidward, and I like that it's always neat to see Tom Kenny make impressions. That's nice. Then we get the first song of the episode, and if you put all of the songs together, I think they are pretty good songs. You know, I was going to make a joke about the 12th century, but then I searched it up and I realized it was the year 1100 through 1200, so yeah, never mind. Also, I love how most of this episode is just them making fun of medieval cliches. It reminds me of an inferior but still good special from season 5 of Pest of the West. I like both, but of course I like this one way more, as you're going to see. Anyway, we have the giant jellyfish, which is very well designed, and how people just worry about the bowling alley. That was a pretty dark joke. This episode makes dark jokes work unlike other episodes, which I am not going to mention. Also, I like Patrick's line, "Oh no, I think I left the water running at home." That was pretty funny. Also, Squidly is kind of like a more fleshed out version of the nice version of Squidward from The Breath of a Fresh Squidward. And now we get introduced to medieval Mr. Krabs, who is funny enough the king. That's weirdly fitting for his character, and Pearl is the princess, which I also think is very fitting. In fact, both of them being royalty makes sense. Then we sort of get introduced to Planktonamore. By the way, I never knew how his name was spelt until I looked it up. Also, I love the fact that medieval Mr. Krabs just cares about taxing the people. That's funny. Also, medieval Gary, or the Leech, however you call it, always gets a chuckle out of me. It's probably the design and the delivery of the meow that makes it funny. Also, I know this might be out of topic, but this episode reminds me of that one regular show episode. Does anyone remember that episode? Anyways, I love how SpongeBob just says hi so casually, and those medieval Mr. Krabs act like he just got insulted. That was funny too. Next we got the third song, which is the best. No doubt, I always like to call this song a medieval diss track. I mean, it does remind me of a lot of modern diss track songs about political people or something, but still, this one is really catchy. I got it stuck in my head for like a day. That means it's a pretty good song. I love singing along to it, to be honest. Also, I love to highlight how SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidly are like siblings. You know what I mean, right? Like those three annoying siblings at the family reunion. I can't be the only one who thinks that. Anyway, I'm shocked that they were even allowed to put a guillotine and even show how it's used really. But I guess it's not as bad as other stuff they show later. And then we found out that SpongeBob and Patrick are the chosen ones from the prophecy. And then the princess, medieval Pearl, get taken away. And then medieval Mr. Krabs launches himself, breaking the guillotine like a maniac. And then medieval Mr. Krabs tells them about the prophecy and stuff. Also, I love how SpongeBob and Patrick just kick themselves out. And that is really, really funny. And then also Squidly goes because medieval potatoes or something. I'd quote Mr. Enter says. Also, I want to mention something else. Does anyone remember that old game of this episode? I never knew how to play it, but I used to play it all the time on some Flash websites, even though I didn't know what I was doing most of the time because I never read the instructions anyway. Then we get the blacksmith scene. And I think there might have been an Iron Man reference or something. Also, why do most of the one-off characters in this episode have British accents? Sure, they sound funny, but I don't know what to say about that really. Also, I like this gag where Patrick puts on the same hat, but I guess the one he was wearing before was plastic, and I think this one might have been a metal one. I don't know really. Also, I love how SpongeBob has like tall legs. It reminds me of the chaperone. Also, I love how SpongeBob just chose a jellyfishing net. That's pretty neat and in character. Also, keep in mind that SpongeBob brings in some Krabby Patties because that is very important later in the episode. Also, there's nothing really to talk about in the scene where Planktonamore watches over SpongeBob, Squidly, and Patrick. It just really reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. The fourth song is just catchy and really funny. I love how just Squidly messes up with the last line. It's really funny. I think there's some pretty good action in the fight against Medieval Sandy. The action in this episode is really good, better than most of the show, but it's not Frozen Face-Off good, but it's not also Atlantis Square Pantis action levels, but still a good action nevertheless. Also, I love how SpongeBob is just making karate noises while just moving weirdly. That's pretty funny. Also, I love the visuals when we fade out. I don't know why. Also, I found Patrick's spit joke funny. If this episode would come out during season 6, it would have been pretty gross. Also, I never questioned how Medieval Sandy didn't need a helmet. By the way, also I love how high the stakes are during this part of the episode. Also, the fifth song, I dunno, I have lost track at this point, lol, which is funny and dark at the same time. Also, I love the joke that follows about yes, that's what I said, that got a laugh out of me. Also, I love how brutal Medieval Sandy gets with the misunderstanding with the guards of the tower. That is really funny. By the way, also Royal Doofus is really funny. By the way, I love how unnecessarily long the stairs are. Love how it makes fun of how big medieval towers are. It's also pretty funny how SpongeBob accidentally steps on Plankton more, and he is so pathetic. Even his attacks make SpongeBob laugh. And then we get the action scene, which is really good. I don't have to say anything else that I didn't say about the other action scene in this episode, so yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that scene. Also, the sixth song is funny. I love the ending to the song, which is really funny. Also, I noticed how Squidly did nothing in the entire episode aside from making things worse, which is really funny. Now that I think about it, also then there's the Krabby Patty thing where the big monster jellyfish eats the Krabby Patties and becomes friendly. It's basically just a better version of the ending of Band in Bikini Bottom. Also, there's the ending with medieval Mr. Krabs inventing Krabby Patties, which just confuses me since a broken bar friend or foe is right there. But whatever, the ending doesn't make sense. But it's still a pretty funny end. So Dunces and Dragons is a pretty fun SpongeBob and Patrick episode and a fun special overall. The vibes of this episode are just really cool, and it does make fun of the medieval ages in a fun way. This episode is one of my favorites. This episode is so good. In fact, it goes off the charts for me. I could compare it to Pest of the West, but this one is much better. No hate to that other special, but still, the episode goes off the charts.
Well, I hope y'all enjoyed hearing Spongyreviews giving their thoughts on this episode. One of these days, we'll disagree on the episode we're reviewing together, but today ain't that day. I may not love Dunces and Dragons as much as them, but I still really like it. And I'd say in general, I somewhat agree with what a lot of SpongeBob fans think about this episode, so let me go ahead and talk about it. Alright, so first off, this episode is just weird. Not really sure how else to put it, the plot is just weird. We get no explanation for anything that happens in this episode, and you know what? I can appreciate that. The part of me that overthinks everything does not, but I'm not listening to that part of me today. And anyway, the weirdness of this episode lends a lot to the funness of the whole thing, as Spongyreviews alluded to and as I will be talking about in the next few minutes. And actually, while I'm still mentioning them, I really liked Spongyreviews' theory about this episode. SpongeBob and Patrick pulling a Powerpuff Girls and Speed Demon, i.e. them being knocked out of the fair fast enough to go back in time, makes enough sense to me, so I'll be adopting this theory for now. Of course, I know there's not supposed to be an explanation, but like I've said over and over, I overthink things, and theorizing makes me think of the old days of watching Gravity Falls and early Steven Universe. Okay, now I'm getting really off topic, let me bring it back. Dunces and Dragons is also a pretty funny episode. I also really loved the joke at the very beginning where the worker literally wanted to take his own life. That shit is dark as hell. But it's also kind of real because being forced to do embarrassing things on the job also makes me want to DIE on the spot. And also the whole setting of the modern portion of the episode, this is so very clearly a parody of the restaurant Medieval Times. For God's sake, the restaurant in this episode is called Medieval Moments. Enough said. Has anyone watching been to Medieval Times before? I have once or twice. I don't remember much, but I still own a cup from there. Fun times, fun times. And speaking of parodies and spoofs, I suppose I should make it clear that I do indeed recognize that the title of this episode comes from the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. I've only played D&D a couple times before, but it's not really my type of game. Because Spongyreviews did go pretty in-depth about this scene at the restaurant, I will not, but I will say that I found it to be a decent enough setup for the episode. Not much that is noteworthy here, since the real plot only starts when SpongeBob and Patrick end up back in the Middle Ages, or the fantasy Middle Ages at least, given all the magic and such. I love how when they do end up back in time, they're immediately thrown into a dungeon, which is where we meet the medieval version of Squidward, or Squidly, as he's called here, and as I'll be calling him during this review. Squidward being a jester is something I didn't realize I needed. It's funny to watch this isekai episode, because that's exactly what it is, now that I've played the Cosmic Shake, since that game is basically isekai central. It's just like this episode, but with a bunch of different worlds, including a medieval one, actually. But anyway, I guess I'll respond to Spongyreviews' comment about the guards and the side characters having a British accent. I agree that it was done for comedic effect, and I imagine also for the atmosphere, since the Middle Ages is something associated with Europe, given the way world history is taught and the fact that we are literally taught that the Middle Ages occurred in Europe, and just think of all kind of like medieval fantasy that always has like British accents, Kafka's Game of Thrones, or all that shit. Anyway, whatever. One thing I really like about Dunces and Dragons is how well it does at immersing us in the medieval environment, while also strategically taking us out of it for comedic moments with SpongeBob and Patrick, such as a couple of those lines Spongyreviews mentioned in their segment of this review. Like the atmosphere of this episode, it's just fantastic. And the backgrounds are gorgeous. And the SpongeBob Wiki has lots of background paintings on here, or on there. I'll link the page so y'all can look, and you can tell that the writers and creatives in general were having fun playing around, or playing with and in this medieval world. All the character designs are neat, and there's so many great bases for jokes here, which also allows them to poke fun at certain tropes associated with medieval fantasy, as Spongyreviews pointed out. A lot of the jokes here are made to fit the time as well. I'm thinking of when Pearl is concerned about Mr. Krabs needing a leech treatment for his blood pressure. And like Spongyreviews, I also really like the line about Patrick being concerned about leaving his water running at home. It's just one of those almost non sequitur kind of lines, though that doesn't really describe it. I don't know, just jokes like that I really like. Mr. Krabs and Pearl being king and princess respectively is also something I didn't realize I needed to see. This is also something that Spongyreviews and I agree on, that playing these roles fit their characters. And Pearl inclusion in an episode is always a win in my book. Not necessarily because I love her character, though I do indeed like her, but because she is a main character, and so it is nice to see her being treated as such. I love how Squidly is such a little menace in this episode too, especially when he starts trolling the king with his song. Why Squidly thought that would be a good idea, I don't know, as it sends all three of them to the guillotine. I find it interesting that it's Squidward's counterpart who provides a lot of the comedic relief in this episode. I guess it's because there's so much chaos and energy elsewhere that the straight man is the one who stands out. It's neat. And speaking of some different dynamics or roles, Patrick has a moment of deadpan comedy in this episode, and him being a source of deadpan humor is something both unexpected and hilarious when done correctly and sparingly. From here, Dunces and Dragons really gets rolling. Also, like Spongyreviews, I loved the whole bit where SpongeBob and Patrick kick themselves out, and then we get a real D&D referencing segment as the heroes gear up for their adventure. Oh, and you can include this in my comment about loving everyone's character design, but I really love that Karen is a crystal ball, and that Plankton, or Planktonomore, is a wizard in this medieval fantasy setting. Especially Karen, that is so brilliant. The coughing bit with Planktonomore is decently funny as well, and then we move on to probably my favorite medieval character aside from Squidly, Sandy, or the Dark Knight. In these times, Sandy is a knight, which I think is pretty cool. Her fight against SpongeBob is pretty fun. I don't have much to add about my thoughts on action scenes in this show, like Spongyreviews talked about a lot, but I'm gonna have to disagree about this being one of the better action scenes of the show. I think Karate Island has this episode beat for sure. And honestly, the action in the show is not particularly great, which I'm fine with, because this isn't that kind of show. And maybe I'm spoiled by being a shonen watcher, I don't know. Anyway, I love how Sandy and SpongeBob's fight ends with SpongeBob's powder self literally suffocating her. The part where she just turns into a stock image of a squirrel is hilarious. I love how out of all the medieval characters, Sandy is the one that speaks the most stereotypically Old English. I wonder if that's because in the typical era of the show, she's the only one who has a conspicuous speech pattern, other than Mr. Krabs, who keeps his pirate speak in this episode. Probably because it still can somewhat fit in the medieval fantasy setting, while Sandy's southern accent can't. Anyway, I think the fact that Sandy has this speech pattern is cool and makes her stand out. And this segment of the episode really gets me thinking of D&D as Sandy joins SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidly's party on their quest. I also really liked the part where Sandy sneaks everyone in, and you can tell, or at least I'm assuming, that Carol and Lawrence had fun recording that bit of dialogue. And then a little later, the slight at Squidly calling him Royal Doofus is pretty funny, so Spongyreviews and I agree once more. And then the stairs part reminds me of that one scene in Kung Fu Panda 2. Man, that was a good movie. I gotta rewatch it. Anyhow, like Spongyreviews, I also really liked this final battle against Planktonomore. That joke with the water was hilarious, if only for Mr. Lawrence's delivery on Psychith. And I love how the jellyfish dragon is defeated with the Chekhov's Krabby Patties shown earlier in the episode. Hey, I'm just glad the Krabby Patties didn't come from nowhere. I also love how it's Squidly's terrible playing that ends up getting SpongeBob and Patrick getting flung right back to the present day. The ending stinger of the episode is high-key the most memorable part of it for me. And it's also the one that makes the episode confusing. But like, every time I think of this episode, without fail, I will hear that little sound from Squidly's clarinet after being crushed by Patrick. Just hilarious. So, earlier I said that I somewhat agree with what a lot of SpongeBob fans think about this episode, and what I meant by that is that although I think this is a really good episode, part of my amazing tier for sure, I think it tends to be overrated. And unfortunately, Spongyreviews, this is where you and I differ, because I could see some elements of the overrating in your review, but it's also fun seeing all the passion and love that you have for this episode too, so I can't hate. But anyway, I think the reason this episode tends to be overrated is because it's in season 4, where many people act ridiculous and talk about how this is the beginning of the end for SpongeBob SquarePants, and so whenever an episode is really good like this, especially a special, since by this point most of the specials have not been very well received, they blow it out of proportion. But like I said, Dunces and Dragons is still an excellent episode that I have no problems with, and so I declare that it shall be in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.2 out of 10. As always, gotta end with some closing thoughts of mine. I considered trying to put in some more medieval English during this review, but that was not a bit I felt like committing to. Y'all get some fun visuals, that's it. Nah, but seriously, I really like how Dunces and Dragons took place in a completely different era. It allowed for some really fun explorations of place and environment that we normally would not get. Ugg did this exact same thing, and later Pest of the West will as well, and even later Dopey Dick will too. I just love stuff like this, and y'all know that. This is a pretty long review today, mostly because it was a collaboration on a special episode, so lots of things to say from both Spongyreviews and I. Even though we largely agree on many things about this episode, it's true that I don't like it as much as they do. Same as our last collaboration, honestly. It's weird being the person who has a less positive opinion, since I'm usually the person who has the positive opinions in general. Maybe this shows that my reviews aren't overly positive after all. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to say here, so I'm just going to end the review now, and I'll see y'all in the next one.